Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. Over the past 48 hours, there has been a lot of breaking news within the UFC, mainly regarding UFC 294. But with all the UFC 294 news, I feel like there has been a massive story that's been buried in the headlines, which is USADA's departure from the UFC effective January 1st, 2024. For those of you who don't know, USADA is the anti-doping organization that the UFC partnered with many years ago. USADA put out a statement saying they were parting ways with the UFC after their contract was unable to be renewed with the UFC. We'll take a look at that statement in a minute. And when that statement was initially put out, because it's a very damning statement, I wanted to do a video immediately, but then I said, you know what? Let me pump the brakes. I want to see what Dana White and the UFC has to say in response. And they did a press conference. And this press conference was an hour and 10 minutes long. I will link it down in the description if you want to watch it in its entirety. I'm going to show you many clips from this press conference. I'm going to try to give you, I'm going to fully encompass the press conference in about maybe 10 to 15 minutes worth of clips in this video. But this is as close to North Korean propaganda I have ever seen from the UFC. And I have a conspiracy theory, and I don't even want to call it a conspiracy theory, about the way the MMA media and the UFC are working together to kind of cover up this entire USADA story and cover up basically the future of drug testing within the UFC and kind of paint the narrative and paint USADA out to be the bad guy and paint the UFC as they really care about their athletes. They really care about their fighters. But we're going to talk about that later in the video because honestly, I don't even feel like it's a conspiracy theory because I have evidence to back it up and I'm going to present it in this video. Now, give you a little bit of backstory for this entire situation. You go back to pre-USADA. There was a lot of guys who were clearly juicing. Just to mention a few, Alistair Overeem, Vitor Belfort. There was many others. It's not just those guys. But it was so clear to the fans, it was so clear to the media that it was a constant topic. And what guys were doing back then is they were applying for TRT exemptions. And what that was is they were saying, I need TRT, I need this performance enhancer. The UFC and the athletic commissions were allowing it, and guys were getting juiced like crazy. They had unbelievable physiques, and there was a lot of outcry about it. There was a lot of fighters complaining, oh, this guy's cheating, that guy's cheating, and they're cheating using TRT. There was a lot of outcry back then. And then eventually, the UFC brought in USADA, I believe it was 2015 or 2016, that they officially brought in USADA, who is going to do randomized drug testing for PEDs. Now, after that, fast forward to 2021, UFC star Conor McGregor breaks his leg against Dustin Poirier at UFC 264. It was a gruesome injury, okay? And Conor McGregor, there's been a lot of talk about him over the last 2 years. When is Conor McGregor going to return? When is he going to return? Because the casuals love Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is the biggest star in the UFC. He generates the most money for the UFC. Well, earlier this year in February, it was announced by the UFC that Conor McGregor would be returning to fight Michael Chandler, and they would be coaches on The Ultimate Fighter. Now, in the entire meantime of that, Conor McGregor had left USADA. He had retired, basically. He had retired. He left the USADA testing pool, and he said, I'm just going to re-enter when I'm ready to fight. And basically what was going on was Conor McGregor was using banned substance within the USADA testing pool while he was outside of the USADA testing pool, assumingly to heal his leg. Now, this kind of went on for a long time. I mean, does it take 4 years to heal a leg with PEDs? I don't know. I'm not going to get into those specifics. But essentially, Conor retired, so he did not have to be randomly drug tested by USADA. He blew up. He was probably 210 pounds, but ripped as could be. And there was a lot of speculations. What is going on here? When is Conor going to re-enter USADA? Conor McGregor even tweeted out saying, I'll be cleared for testing in February, essentially saying, look, I'm going to get off the PEDs, I'm going to get off the banned substances, and I'll re-enroll in the USADA testing pool in February. It never happened. Okay, they since filmed The Ultimate Fighter, they aired The Ultimate Fighter, they had the live finale of The Ultimate Fighter, and we still don't have a date for Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Well, just recently, as of a couple days ago, Conor McGregor has re-entered the USADA pool. And why that is so important is because the USADA has a 6-month waiting period from the time you join the pool to the time you can actually fight. And the reason for that rule, it's a very good reason for that rule, is so you can't leave the USADA pool, abuse PEDs, then return to the USADA pool. Now you've cycled off of those PEDs, but you can still reap the benefits of the PED use in your fight. That is the reason for the 6-month waiting period. If you get tested for 6 months, chances are at the end of 6 months, you're not going to still have benefits from those PEDs that you used 6 months prior. Now, obviously, there's, guys can beat the system, stuff like that, but at least that is the general reason for that rule. Now, after all this happened, Conor McGregor finally enrolled in the USADA testing pool. Basically, he submitted the paperwork last week. That's what he posted online. Well, a couple days ago, USADA put out a statement which said, "We can confirm that Conor McGregor re-entered the USADA testing pool as of Sunday, October 8th, 2023. We have been clear and firm with the UFC that there should be no exception given by the UFC for McGregor to fight until he has returned 2 negative tests and been in the pool for at least 6 months. The rules also allow USADA to keep someone in the testing pool longer before competing based on their declarations upon entry into the pool and testing results. Unfortunately, we do not currently know whether the UFC will ultimately honor the 6-month or longer requirement because as of January 1st, 2024, USADA will no longer be involved with the UFC anti-doping program. Despite a positive and productive meeting on the contract renewal in May of 2023, the UFC did an about-face and informed USADA on Monday, October 9th, that it was going in a different direction. We are disappointed for the UFC athletes who are independent contractors who rely on our independent gold standard global program to protect their rights to a clean, safe, and fair octagon. The UFC's move imperils the immense progress made within the sport under USADA's leadership. The relationship between the USADA and the UFC became untenable given the statements made by UFC leaders and others questioning USADA's principal stance that McGregor should not be allowed to fight without being in the testing pool for at least 6 months. One UFC commentator, they're talking about Joe Rogan, echoed this, recently declaring USADA should not oversee the UFC program since we held firm to the 6-month rule involving McGregor, and since we do not allow fighters without an approved medical basis to use performance-enhancing drugs like experimental, unapproved peptides or testosterones for healing or injuries simply to get back in the octagon. Fighters' long-term health and safety, in addition to fair and level playing field, are more important to USADA than short-term profits at the expense of clean athletes. USADA is proud of the work we've done over the past 8 years to clean up the UFC, and we will continue to provide our unparalleled service to UFC athletes through the remainder of the current contract, which ends December 31st, 2023. As always, we will continue to uphold the rights and voices of clean athletes in the sport." So that's a pretty damning statement by USADA, and basically there's 3 key points in this statement. 1, Conor McGregor is officially back in the USADA testing pool. 2, there was turmoil caused based on the rule of having to be in the USADA testing pool for a certain period of time before Conor McGregor returns to fight. And lastly, that the partnership between USADA and the UFC ends effective December 31st, 2023. Now, we're going to take a look at the UFC's response in a second, but I want to highlight one thing about this statement that I feel like not a lot of people have pointed out, and I wonder if this means more than people are really paying attention to, but that is the rules also allow USADA to keep someone in the testing pool longer before competing based on their declarations upon entry into the pool and testing results. So I'm wondering if because USADA knew that Conor McGregor was abusing banned substances based on their policy, I'm wondering if they told the UFC, not only do we want him in for 6 months, we want him in for 7 months. We want him in for 8 months. There's no way the UFC would go along with that. Now, I have no evidence to, say that USADA said that, but just to throw that little statement in there, I feel like everyone's kind of skimmed over that, but I think that is a very important part of this statement. Now, since this statement came out, Dana White went on the Pat McAfee show, called USADA a bunch of scumbags, and he said, Hunter Campbell and Jeff Novitzky are going to deal with it tonight. Now, they had a press conference, an hour and 10-minute press conference. I will have it linked in the description below if you want to check it out, where they discussed this entire thing. I'm going to show you a bunch of clips from this. I'm going to show you all the important parts. But let me just tell you this, and I said it earlier in the video, this is basically the UFC's version of North Korean propaganda. I could not believe the level of stupidity that we have to endure watching this press conference and all the different little subtleties that you can easily pick up on, and you're like, okay, this is just straight up UFC propaganda. Now, initially, Hunter Campbell comes out and he makes like an initial opening statement. We're going to take a look at a couple clips, but here's the first thing he said regarding USADA's statement.
So, as I'm sure you're all aware, in the last 24, 48 hours, USADA's put out a statement. I think, disappointingly, they used Conor McGregor as a vehicle to sort of try to articulate and reframe a complete misrepresentation of what occurred over the last several months. And, you know, behind the scenes, I've talked to some of you in here about the direction Jeff and I were looking to sort of take this. But what I can categorically tell you is what USADA has put out in the last 48 hours could not be, it couldn't be farther from the truth.
So there you hear Hunter Campbell say, look, what USADA said was categorically false. Their statement was completely false. And it's disappointing that they're using Conor McGregor as a vehicle. There was a lot of Conor McGregor pity party at this press conference, but I just thought it was interesting that he's saying, these statements are completely false. I thought he was going to dive into the particulars of the different statements and maybe read it off and respond to each sentence. But he went into some details later, which we're going to take a look at. But he just said, these are false, and I'm disappointed in what USADA said. He then goes on to essentially threaten legal action against USADA. Let's take a look at that clip, and then we'll come back and react to it.
I'm going to give you guys a legal letter today. I think Lene and the team sort of have it printed out that was sent to USADA last night. The core focus of the letter is, as I've just explained to you, the material misrepresentations that I believe were made on behalf of USADA and Travis. That being said, what I don't want to do today is I'm not going to do what I feel like he's done for the last 24, 48 hours. Jeff and I have always approached this program and everybody involved in it with a level of class and dignity that, and frankly professionalism, that I don't think has been exhibited. And listen, I know Travis has a board, and I know we make up, I think, roughly 25 to 30% of his total budget, total revenue. And so I can tell you, I understand from a business perspective why he may be acting the way he's acting, and he's going to have to answer to a board and people. And
so there you hear Hunter Campbell say, we sent USADA a legal letter. Now, I'm going to discuss more of kind of the media cover-up of this press conference, but one thing I found notable is when journalists were tweeting out different notes from this press conference because it was not live streamed, they said that Hunter Campbell said USADA has until 5 p.m. to respond. I did not hear that anywhere in this press conference at all, but essentially they threatened USADA with legal action based on USADA's statement, and they were expecting a response. The other thing that they said in here, he basically acted like, I'm going to take the high road. I'm not going to trash them. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but I don't want to get into it too much. But then he goes on to say, we make up 20 to 30% of their revenue. And that was a subtle jab. He was saying the reason they said what they said is because we pay them a lot of money and we are breaking off the partnership. That is exactly what Hunter Campbell was implying there. And that's kind of getting into it. And throughout this entire, press conference, and I'll show you a couple clips here, he says, I don't want to get into like childish games, and I don't want to, trash them, and I respect the relationship we've had and what we've done over the past few years. Then he goes on to trash him. He probably does that 6 to 8 times throughout this entire press conference. Now, this next clip I'm going to show you, he basically goes on to discuss the future of drug testing in the UFC just a little bit, and then he kind of trashes them a little bit more. And then there's a key time frame where he talks about USADA and the UFC's relationship souring. Let's take a look.
And they went with a company called Drug Free Sport, which is an entity that we're going to move to as well. So I think there's a lot going on there, and I think that explains sort of the reaction that he's taking publicly. And I think it's a self-preservation tactic. I think it will ultimately fail, but that's for him to deal with, and I really don't want to get into that. What I can say is I'm grateful for the work that we've done with them. I appreciate what they've done for us, and we wouldn't be able to be in the position we're at today without their help and assistance. And frankly, up until the last, I would call it 2 or 3 years, the relationship really was a productive and incredibly beneficial relationship for all parties.
So there you hear Hunter Campbell make a few key points. The first off, that they're going to be moving on with a partnership with Drug Free Sport for testing in 2024. We'll talk about that more in a second. Secondly, he says, this is for USADA's self-preservation. That's why they made this statement. I don't understand how USADA's saying, look, we had some problems behind the scenes, and that's why the contract's ending and we're going our separate ways. I don't understand how that helps with self-preservation. And then lastly, and most importantly, Hunter Campbell says, yeah, we had a great relationship up until 2 to 3 years ago. I find that awfully funny that timeline coincides with UFC star Conor McGregor suffering a gruesome leg break. So you're telling me the relationship started to sour after your biggest star broke his leg, and he's been rehabilitating that gruesome leg injury, and now he's on the cusp of return, and that's when the relationship started to sour. So I thought that time frame was pretty funny. The other thing I want to mention about drug-free sport before we get into the next clip, where he starts to set the narrative even more, but I Googled drug-free sport. I was curious. I know they have partnerships with different major league organizations, but I wanted to see, like, what are some initial things I can find? What are some articles I can find on this company? First thing I noticed, and I don't want to crucify this company just yet. I have to do more research on it. They had one review on Google. Secondly, I found an article from the New York Times discussing drug-free sport with their relationship with the NCAA, and I pulled out these two excerpts. Independent doping experts contend that having a contract with drug-free sport allows sports officials to say they take testing seriously without enacting a truly stringent program. Critics, however, question how rigorous the company's programs are. They say drug-free sport often fails to adhere to tenets of serious drug testing like random unannounced tests, collections of samples by trained independent officials, and testing for a comprehensive list of recreational performance-enhancing drugs. That's just crazy that that's the first thing I find on drug-free sport. So I just thought that was kind of damning. I'm not going to crucify the whole company just yet. We have to see what inevitably ends up happening in 2024, but I thought that was interesting. Now, the next clip we're going to look at is Hunter Campbell basically trying to set the narrative. Oh, USADA's already starting to backtrack. Let's take a look at that.
I know today I was told after I think they received our letter last night, he's already backtracked and he's now confirmed that at no point in time did Jeff, myself, or any other UFC representative, Dana, not a single person ever went to USADA and told them anything other than Conor McGregor would re-enter the program when he was healthy. And in doing so, we would require him to be in the program for 6 months. There would be no exception to the rule. And what I said to Travis on multiple occasions, including the call on Monday, was there would never be a situation where Conor would fight until he'd been in the program for 6 months. And my words were, I don't give a shit if he has 37 clean tests.
So there you hear Hunter Campbell say, look, we never asked USADA to give Conor McGregor an exception to the 6-month rule to require to be in the pool for 6 months. We never asked him that. Nobody ever asked him that. And I don't want to sit here and split hairs because USADA did kind of imply that the UFC wanted that. But USADA said, essentially, there were statements made in the media that they did not like. And you can easily point to Dana White being asked, will Conor McGregor fight this year? It's clearly mathematically impossible. He's saying, I don't know, maybe we're possibly looking for December. And then Conor McGregor's constantly making statements. And then you have Joe Rogan saying they should get rid of USADA. USADA is saying that basically based on this whole Conor McGregor situation and the backlash between the two and the different interactions based on that 6-month rule, that's why they believe that their contract was essentially not renewed. That is what they said. They did not explicitly say that, look, the UFC asked us to give him an exemption for more than 6 months. Again, they did kind of allude to it, but they didn't explicitly say that. And on top of that, they said it could be longer based on different circumstances. Now, in this next clip, and there's so many clips I got to show you. I'm sorry for this video being so long, but do me a favor, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. But this next clip is more Conor McGregor pity party from Hunter Campbell. Let's take a look at it.
I'll say it one last time. What they've done to him is disgusting. And for an entity that holds themselves out to have a level of honor and integrity, using him as a media vehicle to advance a fake narrative is disturbing, disgusting, and I think they have some legitimate legal liability that they should be very concerned with.
So there you hear Hunter Campbell throwing more of a pity party for Conor McGregor. What they've done to Conor McGregor is disgusting. You saw the statement from USADA. They basically said, we're having issues on this 6-month rule with the UFC regarding Conor McGregor's return. Oh, how is Conor ever going to recover from that? Conor is an alleged serial rapist. He's having sexual encounters in the NBA Finals bathroom, whether they're consensual or not. Talk about dirty, okay? He punches senior citizens in bars. He's accused of throwing women off ships. He's basically a known cokehead, a known alcoholic. And oh my God, he's never going to recover. USADA said, oh, they want to give him a less testing period to be in the pool before he can return to the cage. Oh, how is his reputation? Talk about faux outrage. Talk about crybabies. I mean, first off, acting like they care about their fighters to begin with, anything other than the money they can generate. So of course they care about Conor because he generates money, but to act like they're so insulted, they're so disturbed. Look what Dana White does to different fighters on a regular basis. Francis Ngannou, there's plenty of other examples I'm not going to get into. I don't want to make this video too long. And this dude's crying about a statement from USADA, talking about a period of time in a USADA testing pool before you can return. What an absolute joke. Now, in this next clip, more bashing from Hunter Campbell of USADA, even though he says, I don't want to get into that at all. There's just more bashing from Hunter Campbell. Let's take a look.
I will tell you that on the call on Monday that Jeff and I had with Travis, when he lost his mind, and I can tell you he was incredibly disappointed that I informed him that we would not be continuing the partnership at the end of the year. So this wasn't a situation where he came to us and said, this is untenable and we can't continue. It was, hey, great to talk to you, looking forward to the future. And I said, look, as I've given you every indication over the last few months, I've been exploring different alternatives and I'm going in a different direction. And what he basically said is, when he found out, he went crazy. He started saying a bunch of crazy things. And he ultimately made a comment to the effect of, you and Jeff are going to go out there and you're going to tell people that you can run a better program and that we are no longer the gold standard. And I replied, that's exactly what's going to happen because that's the truth.
So there you hear Hunter Campbell, the guy that says, I don't want to get into it. I don't want to bash USADA at all. He literally sounds like a victim of domestic violence, a wife who's at the police station giving a deposition reporting her husband for domestic violence. She's trying to get out of the relationship. That's how Hunter Campbell sounds right now. He's literally crying. This guy lost his mind on the phone. And this is fake serious tone that he's giving off. It's just straight up embarrassing. And this conversation may have went down exactly how he said it went down. But the fact that he's like, oh yeah, this guy just lost his mind and went crazy on the phone. He couldn't believe it because we're separating the relationship. This is the way he acted. Maybe that's true. That may very well be true. We're going to talk about that more later in the video. But then at the end of that clip, he says, yeah, we're going to go out and basically trash USADA after we start our own program. So if that's true, if he knew that, then I guess this guy has a right to be upset. If you're going to leave our program, trash us afterwards, and basically start up your own program that maybe or maybe not is better, he has a right to be a little bit upset. You have a massive organization now trashing you and saying, oh, we're doing it a lot better now. He has a right to be upset. Now, after this, and I tried to include as little clips as possible, but I wanted to give you guys an in-depth breakdown of this press conference without having to go watch the entire, hour and 10 minutes. Here is more just Conor McGregor ass sniffing from Hunter Campbell. Let's take a look.
Conor is 100% in the pool. He made himself available in every way. I can tell you because I personally was a part of it with him. He's conducted himself with integrity and honesty. He's done everything right. And he's, as you can imagine, very upset at the moment for the way that they've sort of used him. And they've never done that with any other athlete in history. And I think that's a really important point. What they've done in the entire history of the program, they've never done before.
So there you hear Hunter Campbell just saying, oh, Conor McGregor, he's so honest. There's so much integrity. I mean, is Hunter Campbell hanging out with this guy 24/7? How can he make those types of statements when he's not in this guy's personal vicinity 24/7? I know that's a bit of an exaggeration, but he talks to Conor McGregor on the phone, okay? It's not like he's with him for any meaningful period of time every single day or even multiple times a week. He talks to him on the phone. He's like, yeah, he's so honest and there's so much integrity there and I can't believe it. He's very upset. Conor McGregor's so upset about this. Yeah, Conor McGregor's so upset about this. He went and tweeted out that Gilbert Burns is a fat lesbian on Twitter. Yeah, he's so devastated. He's so upset. It's just more fake outrage and just spinning the narrative by Hunter Campbell. Now, next we're going to hear from Jeff Novitzky discussing the program. And honestly, this is where I started to think, okay, this is just true propaganda. This is true propaganda. Let's take a look at what Jeff Novitzky has to say.
I will never be involved with a program that compromises the core values of what a gold, and let's call it a platinum standard program, looks like. I've staked my career, my reputation, my credibility, in some cases the safety of myself and my family, and everything that I've done as a professional and on a personal level on maintaining these standards and fighting with everything I have for clean sport, and that will continue.
So there you hear Novitzky say, I will never be associated with a program that isn't the gold standard or the platinum standard. And he's literally reading a script. He needed a script to say, look, my integrity, my honesty will not be questioned. I will never be associated with a program that is not gold or platinum standard. He literally needed a script to say that. This guy looks like he's being held hostage. He then goes on to discuss the program a little bit more and discuss what USADA said. Let's take a look at more of what Novitzky said.
The narrative that USADA put out yesterday is false. It's garbage, trash. I can't sit up here and come up with enough adjectives of what they said and what that's done to this program currently. Here's what the accurate narrative is. You guys all know this. We've talked about it, and I've got up here many times and talked about this throughout the years, but the core principles of our anti-doping program are as follows: integrity, independence, transparency, strength and comprehensiveness, fairness, and none of these principles are changing going forward. They're only going to get stronger.
So there, Novitzky continues to go on, reading off his script, discussing, here's the principles of our program and will continue to be our principles going forward. First off, he literally looks like he's being held hostage. It's one of those videos where somebody gets abducted by a terrorist organization and they send a video back and say, yeah, they're treating us just fine. Everything's great. He is literally just reading off this script, saying how great the new program is going to be and that USADA's trash and false. USADA said that the relationship became untenable based off of public statements by Dana White is what they're implying. Joe Rogan is what they're implying regarding the 6-month rule with Conor McGregor. That is what they said. They've still yet to really provide evidence saying, oh, that's just not true. That's just not true. It's not like they said, oh, flat out, they wanted him in before 6 months. It's not like they said that. Again, I know I'm splitting hairs there a little bit, but to act like what USADA said was so just categorically false is just absolutely insane to me. Now, a couple key details I want to highlight of the plan that Novitzky talks about that I'm not going to show you a clip for. He says there will be better whereabouts reporting. Okay, we'll see how that goes if UFC fighters have to report where they are so they can be randomly drug tested. He also says there will be better transparency. And he also says, yeah, fighters really care about the jackets. I've had multiple fighters ask me if we'll still get jackets for passing a certain amount of tests. There'll still be jackets. Don't worry about that. And he announces the program that he will be joining, which is Drug-Free Sports, and, discusses the accredited labs who will be doing the testing. And it's just hyping up the program, more propaganda about how this program is going to be so great. It's going to be so much better than USADA. Now, this next clip is from Hunter Campbell. And if you've been watching the UFC for a long period of time, what he has said has been a talking point by the UFC and Dana White in particular for over 10 years. Let's take a listen.
We're subject to the jurisdiction of athletic commissions. So what I'll tell you is I actually had a pretty long couple days dealing with some Abu Dhabi stuff. Dana and I had a lot going on. I didn't even know USADA put out a press release. And the first call that I got that informed me that something had happened was actually Andy Foster. So for those of you that are aware of the regulatory space, Andy Foster is sort of, at the time, right now, he's sort of the guy in the regulatory field that everyone sort of looks to in terms of leadership. And the first thing he said to me is, Hunter, I am so glad to hear that you're terminating the USADA partnership at the end of the year. You guys spend so much money, you put so much work into this, you can do it so much better. As you know, I've hated working with USADA. I've never enjoyed it. I know other commissioners feel the same way.
So there, Hunter Campbell regurgitates the same talking point that Dana White and the UFC has said for years. Even if you don't like our independent testing system that's coming up, we are regulated by the government. What more do you want? We're regulated by the government. And then you've heard him multiple times saying, oh, I don't want to get into this. I don't want to trash anyone. He said, yeah, even the athletic commissions are calling me up and saying, yeah, thank God you got rid of USADA. I mean, these are just constant jabs at USADA over the course of an hour and 10-minute video. Yeah, Andy Foster doesn't like him. You guys can do so much better. You guys will do such a better job. I hate working with USADA. Okay, well, Andy Foster, I know people hype him up. He's the California Athletic Commission. He's like the director over there or whatever. But damn, man, you're calling up Hunter Campbell and just, I don't even want to he's brown-nosing him. You're literally sniffing his ass right now. You guys can do such a better job than USADA, who's been doing it for so many years. And maybe that's right. But again, how is that pertinent to anything? How is that pertinent? It's just, Oh yeah, I'm not going to say anything bad about USADA. I'm just here to discuss the facts. Oh, by the way, the athletic commission called me and said, yeah, I hate USADA. I'm glad they're gone. And another bunch of other athletic commissions are thinking the same thing, and they care the same way. They hate USADA. They're glad they're gone as well. Just absolute craziness, and just another way. They're still working with USADA. They've hyped up USADA. USADA's helped clean up the sport, and USADA's so great, but yet now USADA's just trash. USADA's trash now. Makes absolutely no sense. It's like when a fighter's going into a fight, they crap all over their opponent sometimes. This doesn't happen all the time. And then after they beat them, they act like it was a great win. Well, you say that fighter sucked. So how is that a great win now? It just makes absolutely no sense. Now, next, Novitzky introduces, he's not actually there, the guy's not there, who will be the new head of this testing agency, who will oversee the new drug testing policy for the UFC.
But to the UFC world, the independent administrator of the UFC's new and improved anti-doping program, George Piro. And when you talk about George Piro, you're talking about an individual with the highest level of integrity and credibility you can possibly imagine. And while I had a noticeable federal law enforcement career, my resume pales in comparison to that of George Piro. And as I talk about George Piro, he's quite literally an American hero. He just recently retired as the special agent in charge of the FBI field office in Miami, Florida. He previously was the assistant director of the International Operations Division at FBI headquarters.
So there, Novitzky introduces who will be the head of this new program, which is George Piro, and he begins hyping him up. Yeah, he worked at the FBI. He's retired. He's so great. He's just hyping him up nonstop. And I understand they're going to hype this guy up because now he's working for them. They're going to say, oh, he's so great. He's going to do a much better job than USADA. But this next clip I'm going to show you, when I watched this, I literally laughed out loud. The amount of reaching they are doing to hype up a guy who's supposed to be overseeing drug testing of UFC fighters. Let's take a look.
We actually had George out at headquarters a few weeks ago, and he was mentioning to us that he's watched every single UFC pay-per-view, every single fight, virtually every one live. He knows more about this sport in the UFC than probably the entire personnel of USADA does. And most significantly, when the United States captured Saddam Hussein, George was solely in charge of his interrogation. The US government literally put the safety of the citizens of the United States in his hands, sent him over to Iraq, and he was Saddam's only contact with the outside world for a period of about 9 months.
So there he goes on to hype up George Piro even more. He worked for the FBI. He helped capture and interrogate Saddam Hussein. He knows every fighter on the roster. This was the most bizarre propaganda press conference I ever heard. First off, how was him interrogating Saddam Hussein and being the only point of contact for Saddam Hussein, how is that even relevant? I'm sure George Piro is a fine person. I'm sure he's a great guy. He worked for the FBI. He retired. How is that any way a credential? Yeah, he's going to do a great job as the head of athlete testing. What are they going to start waterboarding fighters just to get drug tests or to find out if they're using steroids, or if they catch somebody, they're going to start waterboarding them and they're going to be like, where'd you get the PEDs from? Who else is using? Is that what he's implying here? And then I didn't put it in the clip, but it was laughable. He goes on to say he was on 60 Minutes twice. George Piro was on 60 Minutes twice. I was literally dying. And what I found funny is, yeah, George Piro has watched every UFC fight ever live. I don't want to start splitting hairs here too much. That sounds like a massive conflict of interest. If he's watching every single UFC event live, sounds like he probably has some favorite fighters. So I already don't trust George Piro. Just because he worked for the FBI doesn't mean all of a sudden I'm going to trust George Piro as the head of the testing organization, the random drug testing for the UFC. Just makes absolutely no sense to me. And also, it's not like he owns a business it's not like he retired from the FBI and then started a business. So how is he independent? I don't understand. They're saying he's independent. He made that very clear multiple times in clips you didn't see. How is he independent if you're just signing him up off the couch to run this program. It's not like he has a company that does this and he's been doing it for years. They're just saying, hey, bro, and we're going to talk about it more in a minute because I'm going to show you another clip where they kind of talk about it. But how does that make any sense? I really don't understand how that makes any sense. Sounds like a conflict of interest. And since when is being on 60 Minutes a credential to run a testing program for athletes all around the world? I guess, you know, when you talk to Saddam Hussein, I think that's, you know, a good enough credential for the UFC, I guess. Let's take a look at the next clip because I thought this was hilarious as well. Jeff Novitzky says something about the fighters here. We'll come back and discuss it in a minute.
That's something that USADA has done over the last 24 hours. They've confused the shit out of our fighters. They don't know what's going on. You know, if you take into account the managers that have contacted Don and I and the fighters, I'd say well over half of our roster thinks there's currently no drug testing going on. And that's not true. And for an organization like USADA that stands up on a mountain and says, we protect the rights of clean athletes, that's what we do. They didn't do it here.
So there you hear Novitzky saying, fighters are confused. Managers are calling me. Half the roster thinks there's no testing. Let's go back to USADA's statement, okay? USADA said, as of January 1st, 2024, USADA will no longer be involved with the UFC anti-doping program. They also say in another excerpt, we will continue to provide our unparalleled service to the UFC athletes through the remainder of the current contract, which ends December 31st, 2023. If the fighters can't read, if the managers can't decipher that information to understand they will be tested up until December 31st, at least through USADA, stop pretending with the fake outrage. I honestly don't believe that. If so, they need to have those fighters' brains scanned, and they need to teach those fighters to think critically and look up information before calling people and asking them questions. That is completely ridiculous. I don't believe it's half the roster believe that. How could you not look up the statement and actually read the statement and say, oh, well, this relationship ends on December 31st? It made absolutely no sense. Now, we're going to get to this next point a little bit later in the video as well, but one of the only media members there is the MacLife, who uploaded this video. For those of you who don't know, MacLife is one of the bigger MMA websites, which is owned by Conor McGregor. Talk about a conflict of interest. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. I got a couple more clips to show you I want to get through because I'm making this video ridiculously long. But the next clip is a statement from Hunter Campbell I could not leave out of this video. Let's take a look at it.
They run a little bit like a dictatorship. And part of the reason why is that they're dealing with a body of athletes that essentially have no financial resource. If you're one of the best 400-meter sprinters in the world, how much money do you think you make? You know what I mean? With us, it doesn't work that way. You don't come in and just tell us how this works. You don't tell us, this is what we're doing. No, it's a conversation. And we have an ability to create dialogue and communication and work in a partnership.
Hunter Campbell did not have the audacity to just look us dead in the eye and say, yeah, USADA runs like a dictatorship over the fighters, or tries to. They're used to dealing with athletes that don't have any money, and UFC fighters have money, so you're not going to dictate to us. Here it shows the UFC's distaste for USADA enforcing policy rules. So that's why I tend to believe USADA and what they've said in their statement, and they kind of alluded to certain things. Look at Hunter Campbell literally saying, you're not going to tell us what to do. We're going to have dialogue and we're going to figure it out. That sounds an awful lot like there was turmoil behind the scenes based on different policies within USADA and the way they were implemented in the UFC. I cannot believe that they went out there. This dude's supposed to be a lawyer. He looks guilty as anything. He looks guilty as anything. And then throughout the questioning period from the media members, by the way, there's only a couple media members there. We'll discuss that in a second. It's nothing but softball question after softball question. MacLife is like, you can really tell this statement was rooted in emotion. And it's just, I mean, it was so blatantly obvious that this was nothing but UFC propaganda. They continue to complain more about USADA. I mean, basically, this was an hour and 10 minutes of Hunter Campbell and Jeff Novitzky complaining about USADA. And some of the complaints were legitimate, talking about different procedures that they didn't like. But again, it just brings to light that, oh, well, they don't like some of the things USADA wants to enforce, so they're splitting ways with them. That's literally what they're saying. So they are essentially confirming USADA's statement. That's literally what they're doing. It's just, it's crazy. And another clip I wanted to put in here, but I'm not going to put another clip that I don't need to. He said, yeah, they said something about the UFC's revenue. They don't need to worry about our revenue. That's awfully rich coming from a guy who earlier in this very same video said, yeah, we're 20 to 30% of USADA's revenue. Why are you worried about their revenue? Why are you worried about their revenue? And then you're saying, oh, don't worry about our revenue. I just can't believe there's so many contradictory statements in this one video. I could not believe it. Now we have a couple more clips that I want to get to. This next one I believe is most important because there's a discussion of who they were going to hire when USADA left. And they bring up Jeff Novitzky. I'm like, what are they talking about here? I was confused for a second, but let's take a listen.
When we built an anti-doping program, Dana Lorenzo, they went out there and got Jeff Novitzky. When we're looking at building out an anti-doping program, I went to Jeff and I said, this would kill me. You might be the best individual in the world to run an anti-doping program on your own. No one has a higher level of credibility. No one knows the sport better. It would fucking kill me to lose you because I know the trust and the respect you have, but you might be the best guy. He called me back the next day and said, I'm so flattered, I'm honored, but I love being a part of this company. I love Dana, I love you, I love the fighters. There's one guy that if I was building the program, I would hire first, and that was George.
So there you hear one of the more bizarre statements from Hunter Campbell. He essentially publicly admits, yeah, we were thinking about making Jeff Novitzky the head of this program. We were basically going to let him go, but rehire him under a different job title. He's going to start up his own company, I guess, and be the head of this anti-doping program. How does that... Somebody explain to me this down in the comments. How is that in any way, shape, or form independent? I don't understand how that is independent in any capacity. And then they say, oh, well, Jeff Novitzky said, oh, let's hire this guy. How is this independent at all? That doesn't make any sense. At this point, I don't trust George Piro. I don't trust Jeff Novitzky. How is that independent to take an employee that you so-called love, that you can't do without, and you're going to say, you know what, you're going to head this program where we truly need independence. Otherwise, the program doesn't matter. It makes absolutely no sense at all. It makes no sense. How would that be independent? Somebody please explain that to me. Now, they go one more to say, reach out to athletic commissions. They'll complain about USADA as well. And then he makes this statement about Conor McGregor. Let's take a look, and then I'm going to come back and give my thoughts on this.
And then they claim that the reason that partnership is ending is as a result of him or some request. It literally makes no sense. It would have been easier just to say, Conor's not going in and your contract's terminated, we'll see you later. Why would he do that? Why would we do that? Again, if you think about the timeline, none of what they're saying makes sense.
So there he says, Conor joining USADA now, it would make no sense if that's the reason we were getting rid of USADA. It could have been turmoil in the past that Dana White and the UFC was not happy about, so now they are terminating the contract or not renewing the contract is the better way to phrase it because of that turmoil in the past. And what's the perfect cover for it? Oh, it's 1 month, 2 months before the end of the program. Conor's clean now. Let's enroll him, and then we can do whatever we want next year. Then we can do whatever we want. It makes perfect sense to me. If they said, oh, you know what, we're ending the USADA program, Conor McGregor never rejoins, guess who is painted as public enemy number one with no defense? It would be the UFC. It would be the UFC. There's just, to say the timeline makes no sense. The timeline makes no sense that you announced a fight in February, that the fighter is required to be in the pool for 6 months. He just joined almost the end of the year. It's like mid-October. He's finally joining. That makes no sense. So there's an easy explanation for that. And another thing I want to point out, and we're going to show you one, I'm going to show you one last clip, but Kevin Ioli's also there asking questions. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I hope stuff gets better for fighters. I truly do. If this is a net benefit for fighters, okay, I'm happy about it. But I don't trust that this is going to be a net benefit for the fighters at all. I think it's going to end up being the opposite. And they go on and on and on, complaining about USADA and different procedures that they don't like about USADA, and essentially complain for, I think it was the last 20 minutes of the video, saying USADA's too strict with this. They're too strict for that. We don't like them testing at this times and that times. The only reason that a program is effective is because of randomness. That is the only reason a drug testing program to catch cheaters actually works, is because it's random. And they complain about that and complain about it and say, I don't like this rule, I don't like that rule, I don't like this rule. It just makes perfect sense. They're basically corroborating the story from USADA in their original statement. One last clip I want to look at, because I thought I misunderstood Hunter Campbell when he was saying, I thought about Jeff Novitzky leaving and he was going to head the new program, which really they were going to hire him. How is that going to be independent? Jeff Novitzky says the same thing. How damning is this? How damning is this? Let's take a look at the last clip.
We will always listen to our fighters. As Hunter mentioned, we had talked about me potentially separating from the UFC and being the independent administrator. I, like Hunter, didn't want to give this up. I love our fighters. I love interacting with them. I love being in a position where I'm hopefully helping their careers be longer, safer, more fruitful. And so, I mean, we take input from our fighters virtually every single day, and that's not going to stop.
So there you hear Jeff Novitzky literally say out loud, yeah, they thought about having me separate from the UFC and I was going to head up the organization that was going to be the independent contractor doing the drug testing. How are they saying this out loud and thinking that sounds good? How is no MMA media calling him out on this? How is that not a conflict of interest? The guy that you've worked side by side with for 8 years, who apparently loves you so much he hates to see you leave, how is that independent? How is that independent drug testing at all? How is that a good program? I don't understand it at all. The only thing that can be good is randomized drug testing. And I understand some of the fighters, you know, the USADA program isn't the greatest for them. They have to report their whereabouts. They have to give blood. They have to give urine. But if there's one thing that benefits the sport as a whole in terms of credibility and also in terms of brain damage, it's PED testing. Of course, people can cheat the system. But let me just tell you this. You know, people saying, oh, there's no credible evidence. You have idiot MMA media saying there's no credible evidence that this has helped at all. USADA has caught more dirty athletes than the athletic commissions have ever caught combined together. Ever. The commission does not do a good job of drug testing. And granted, now they're going to do another randomized drug testing with this new program. But it's just crazy to me that they act as if there was no benefits to having drug testing. You have people like Luke Thomas cheerleading USADA's, getting rid of USADA by the UFC. And let me explain to you why the MMA media loves this. What is good for Conor McGregor and the UFC is good for their pockets. It indirectly affects their bank account. Conor McGregor is a massive UFC superstar. They want him in the cage as soon as possible because it helps them. It makes them more relevant. It makes them more money. They don't care what rule has to be stepped on. They don't care at all. They just want the sport to be as popular as possible because guess what? They get paid more. They're more relevant. They can write more articles, do more videos. In a way, it affects me as well. Making videos here and, Conor McGregor is going to be more popular if he's fighting and the videos will be more popular if he's fighting. I don't care about that. But this is the contradiction of the MMA media. First off, they're shills for the UFC in general, okay? Then, basically, Conor McGregor directly affects their bank account. And this whole press conference from start to finish stunk like hell. It stunk like hell. First off, there was multiple live streams of this event, okay? There was multiple live streams of this event. The second before it started, all the live streams were taken down. All the live streams were gone. Oh, well, that's awfully funny. How does that happen? This is supposed to be one of the most important press conferences in the history of the sport regarding drug testing that leans credibility to the sport, to having a clean sport. And all of a sudden, all the live streams go down due to technical difficulties. Then it finally gets uploaded afterwards. I recognize 2 out of the 3 media members' voice. One is Oscar Willis from the MacLife. He literally works for Conor McGregor, UFC shill, UFC lapdog, Dana White lapdog. Then you have Kevin Iole, who works for Yahoo Sports. Literally Dana White's lapdog for many years. He likes sitting on Dana White's lap and squirming around. He's never going to ask any tough questions. All he did was throw up softball questions. I don't know who the last guy was. I didn't recognize his voice. He didn't say his name. But what an absolute joke. Then on top of that, and this just goes to show me they're covering up stuff. This was a highly planned press conference where they had scripts for both Hunter Campbell and Jeff Novitzky. And on top of that, that full upload that finally came, that's like an hour and 10 minutes, there was multiple cuts that I caught. I rewatched it multiple times. There's a cut at the timestamp of 24 minutes and 5 seconds. There's a cut at the 51-minute mark and 9 seconds. That is multiple cuts in the upload after the fact. And then on top of that, it ends at a perfect time. It ends right as he's done talking. There's no formal ending like they get up and leave. They were saying stuff and it just cuts off almost right in the middle of them talking. Right at the end of a sentence, it just cuts off. There's no, okay, thank you guys for coming out, blah, blah. It's just done. That's it. So there was multiple things that were said that aren't on camera. They aren't on video. And there was multiple things that were tweeted out by different reporters that I never heard in the video. So I don't know if they weren't supposed to tweet it out. The UFC didn't like the way they sounded. But this press conference as a whole was an absolute joke. I do believe that this new drug testing program is going to be a disaster. I think first off, I think it's going to have no credibility. And I understand USADA didn't have the best credibility with the whole Brock Lesnar situation, the whole John Jones picogram situation. But I do believe USADA will have more credibility than having some guy that likes Jeff Novitzky and who's friends, who they just picked off a couch, who's retired, who just wants a paycheck coming in. You're telling me the UFC didn't hand select this guy because he would be more lenient with what the UFC wanted. They essentially said as much in this press conference. That's literally what they said. USADA's too strict. We don't want to do business with them anymore. That's why we're hiring someone new, because they won't bend to our will. They essentially said as much. So I also think you have the UFC and Dana White, who's vindictive against fighters. Tell me they won't use this system to be vindictive against fighters. I can totally see the UFC abusing this system and infringing on fighters' rights who are supposed independent contractors, making it worse for fighters. A fighter, oh, he turned down a fight. We don't like him. He pulled out of a fight. We don't like him because of that. Let's drug test him more. Supposedly this guy, George Piro, is going to be deciding the frequency of testing and all this and that. And they hyped up the labs they were going to be doing the testing from. They hyped up the company that was going to be doing the blood draws and all that stuff. And it sounds great. And if you don't really think about it, it sounds great. But the person who has sent the results is the hand-picked hire of George Piro, who's friends with Jeff Novitzky. This stinks so bad. This is a massive conspiracy. And the MMA media will cover it up. They won't talk about it. They're not going to discuss it enough because they don't care. They don't want to get out of the UFC's good graces. They don't want to point it out. They don't want to cover it at all because at the end of the day, they want what the UFC wants, which is the biggest stars fighting at every turn. I guarantee with this new program, you will never see a high-profile athlete ever caught by this new program. Maybe I'm going to be wrong. Maybe I'm going to be proven wrong. I can't wait to hear more about this program. But right now, everything I've seen at this press conference, it seems like USADA is telling the truth. I'm not going to say that for 100% certainty. But from what I understand and what I see from both sides, I know there's two sides to every story and then there's the truth. I think there was some back and forth regarding that 6-month exception because Dana White was saying things publicly and they say, we made it very clear there was going to be no 6-month exception for Conor McGregor. Dana White did not make that clear in the media. We just found that out literally just now. Literally just now. How many times has Dana White been asked that? And he said, oh no, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. He said, who cares what USADA said? And then USADA says, okay, look, there was turmoil because of public statements made by public figures in the UFC, including Dana White and Joe Rogan. They didn't say their names, but that's who they were talking about. There's video evidence of them saying that. Now, what I probably believe is the UFC didn't like that USADA wouldn't bend to their will. They were like, look, we're going to stop doing business with them. We're going to probably just have Conor McGregor enter the pool just to show, to kind of have good publicity there. We're going to end the program with them. We're going to start our own program. We're going to run our own program. And that way we don't have to worry about bending the will to USADA or them making our company look bad. And they didn't like what USADA had to say. So they decided, okay, we're not going to renew your contract. We are done. We are starting our own program. That is what I truly believe happened between the two, which basically lines up with what USADA said in their statement. So ultimately, it remains to be seen what's going to happen, but this basically covers the entire situation as we know it right now. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I hope this ends well for the fighters. I hope the fighters get better benefits out of this. But the fact that you have Hunter Campbell and Jeff Novitzky acting like they care so much about the fighters and they're so confused. What an absolute joke. There's dudes going in there making 12 and 12, taking nasty brain damage. They don't even get long-term health care. They barely get paid enough for their expenses. And they're acting like, oh yeah, we care so much. We care so much about the athletes. It's an absolute joke. And the MMA media will, no live stream. No live stream. They post the video. There's multiple edits and cuts in the video. I gave you the timestamps. If you don't believe me, go check it out. 24 minutes and 5 seconds, 51 minutes and 9 seconds. And I wasn't staring at the screen for every possible second because I watched this multiple times. There may be more. So let me know if you see any more, if you watched the full video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry that this video is so unbelievably long, but let me know what you guys think. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.